the spouse. Okay, now. So here's the family ministry department will offer a special music for this afternoon. We sing the song that's familiar, entitled The Family of God.
Sounds so good. I tell you, I feel blessed. That was a fantastic lunch. Wouldn't you agree? I said to somebody, I think after that good food, we're ready to move our membership here. You sold me just on the food, right? I thought coming to Singapore, I was joking with friends back home. I said, I'm going to lose weight I just know I'm going to lose weight when I go there. I think I'm going to gain weight. I've been doing my push-ups in the morning and swimming laps at the hotel pool where I'm at, but I'm convinced that I'm going to gain weight. You know, we're just so glad to be here. My wife and I and our kids are somewhere around here. My wife's nodding; they're around here somewhere. We're just glad to be able to be here. We just want to serve you guys. That's what we want to do. We want to serve your church. We want to serve your community. We want to love on you guys. And I'm very passionate about family ministries. I already wear enough hats where I don't do family ministries, or at least I don't direct it in my local conference. But I could see myself one day definitely taking on that role. I'm very passionate about it because, you know, when it comes to evangelism, when it comes to church planting, when it comes to church revitalization, The truth is, a church can only be as healthy as the families are. And the families can only be as healthy as the marriages are. And if you have kids, well, let me ask you, how many of you have kids? Let me see your hands. How many of you love your kids? Okay, just want to make sure the same hands are up. I guess it depends, right? I mean, kids are hard. Would you agree with me as parents? Is it hard being a parent, yes or no? It is a hard job. It really is. And I'll tell you, there is no such thing as a perfect parent. Just like I said last night, there's no such thing as a perfect marriage. There is a such thing as a good marriage, and you can be a good parent, but even as a good parent, there are going to be days where, well, you lose it. All right? So I'm going to be very upfront and authentic with you. Now, this presentation that I put together, I actually put this together when COVID first started. We had, like probably your area, we had a lot of church events, a lot of seminars, a lot of things planned in the community, and then COVID, March of 2020 happened, and I don't know if you guys went through this, but where we live, the idea was we're going to shut everything down for 2 weeks. They called it flattening the curve. Did you guys ever hear that? Flatten the curve. Little did we know that the 2 weeks would turn into, 3 years. So once everything shut down in ministry, Pastor Johnny and I, we don't get paid just to stay home, do we? So we had to get creative. And what are we going to do? And so I decided I'm going to put together a 10-part series on family, marriage, emotional intelligence, and mental health. And I'm going to share with you at the very end of their presentation here how you can actually go and watch and have the entire 10-part series for your church. And so I'll share that with you when we wrap up here this afternoon. Now, I want you to know that when it comes to parenting, you didn't have the opportunity or the privilege to choose the kind of parents you had. Some of us here may have grown up in a very healthy home. You grew up in a home where you had a mom and dad that were intact. They were involved in church. They weren't perfect, because nobody is, but overall they were very good parents. Some of you grew up with that luxury, but you know what? Not everybody has that luxury. Not everybody grows up in a home where they've got a mom and a dad who not only love each other, but also love their kids. See, I grew up in a divorced home. My parents divorced when I was 6 months old. I was raised primarily by my mom, who I love dearly, but I did spend weekends with my father. Now, my dad was quite abusive to myself, more physically abusive to me than he was to my sister, but he was very emotionally and mentally abusive to both my sister and myself. And so, like I mentioned in my sermon earlier today, that when my wife and I got married, we decided that when it comes to our kids, we want to break the cycle. And so in our home, we decided that we were going to raise our kids where there wouldn't be drugs or alcohol or any other type of abuse like that. And so it's very important as parents that you also make that decision. Now, when it comes to life, I hope you have a value list. Everybody needs to understand what they value most in life, all right? Not only do you need a mission statement, but you need to know your value list. So here's what I mean by that. I've got a value list, and because we're members of the same community of faith, we're all Seventh-day Adventist Christians, or at least most of us probably are Adventists here today, we probably have a similar value list. So here's what mine is. Number one in my life is God. Number one on my value list is God. Number two is my wife. Number three are my kids. Number four would be like my other extended family, my siblings and cousins and aunts and uncles, in-laws, things like that. You know, what is that? Was that number four? That was number four, right? All right. Number five would be like my friends, maybe my job, my career, my calling, my health. Somewhere down towards the bottom of my list would be like personal finance, all right? That's important, wouldn't you agree? Finance, personal finance is very important. Now, the reason it's important to understand your value list is because when it comes to making decisions in life, you want to make decisions based upon what you value most, all right? So, for example, if you say you value God most, that He's number one in your life, but all of the decisions you're making are based on finances, even though you may say God is number one in your life, based upon the decisions you're making, finances is actually most important in your life. Do you see how that works? Yes or no? So it's important to understand your value list. Now, for most of us here, I imagine our kids are going to be like number 2 or number 3 when it comes to our value list. And of course, depending on how your kids are behaving at any given time will determine where they end up on your value list, right? I heard the story of a guy who had no kids. This guy had no kids, and he was going to write a book on parenting. Have you ever had somebody who has no kids ever try to give you parenting advice? I've had people who have no kids try to give me parenting advice, and I just look at them and smile. Like, you have no idea what you're talking about, right? So this guy's got no kids. He decides he's going to write a book on parenting, and he calls it the 10 Commandments of Parenting. Well, then he has a child. His firstborn comes, and he decides he's going to rewrite the book, and now he calls it the 10 Suggestions of Parenting, right? And then his child grows up and becomes a teenager, and he changes the book once again to now he calls it the 10 Questions about Parenting, right? That's the progression that people go through. Those who don't have kids think, well, when I have kids, here's how my kids are going to behave, right? And then they have kids and realize, yeah, that whole idea of here's how my kids are going to behave quickly goes out the window. So Mark Twain, kind of a lot of humorous quotes. He said, when a child becomes a teenager, you should put him in a barrel and feed him through a hole in the lid. When they turn 16, he said, you got to plug the hole, right? And so I've got a 15-year-old who's going to very soon be 16. And, teenage years are not only hard on parents, but let's be honest, the culture in which our kids are growing up in is much different than the culture we grew up in. Would you agree, yes or no? It is much different. It is much, much harder because things are more instant and they've got the world's information. If they've got a cell phone, they carry literally the world's information as we know it in their front pocket. You know, it's been said, and I like this quote. I can't give credit to whoever said it, but I love this quote. It's been said, spoil your kids and you will raise your grandkids. But if you raise your kids, you will get to what? Spoil your grandkids. You see the way that works there? And so keep that in mind when it comes to raising your kids. Now, again, the first thing I want you to know is this. You did not have the privilege of choosing your parents. But if you're a parent today, it's never too late. You can choose the type or the kind of parent that you're going to be. If you grew up in a home where there was dysfunction and abuse, as a parent, you can choose for yourself, for your family, that you want to break any cycle of dysfunction in your life. In other words, you can choose the kind of parent that you're going to be. You know, a study was done, a very extensive study was done on why do some kids succeed in life and other kids do not. And so it's a very interesting study. Why do some kids grow up to be successful in life and other kids, well, choose not to? And so in the end of this study, they were looking at all the different causes and choices and looking at all the metrics to see what is the number one factor that determined if a child grows up to be successful or not. You want to know what the number one factor was, the number one metric? It's so simple and it is so easy. It'll blow your mind. In fact, what I'm going to share with you right now is worth what you paid to get in here this afternoon. Let me tell you. Here's the number one thing they discovered on why kids grow up to be successful. The number one factor, you ready? It's not in your notes, so you're going to want to write this down. The number one thing was this: families that eat dinner together around the table. That was the number one factor in studies done on why some kids grow up to be successful and others do not. Think about that. Families that eat dinner together around the table. Now, before COVID happened, we occasionally ate dinner around the table. We typically, my wife and I would stand in the kitchen and my kids were on the other side of the counter on their, these like bar stool type seats, and they would sit there and eat, and my wife and I would kind of stand on the other side and eat. But when COVID hit, we decided, you know what? We need to start eating dinner around the table. Now, we don't do it every night, but we do it several nights a week where we actually sit around the table, we eat dinner together, and my kids can probably quote me on this, but whenever we eat dinner, I always ask the question, what was your favorite part of the day? What was the best thing that happened to you all day? And every day, oh, okay, I know you're going to ask that question, Dad. It's kind of the response sometimes I get. But I want to know. I want to find out what was the best thing that happened all day, because it's really easy to focus on the negative things. And I want to try to get some kind of discussion because I want my kids to know that I am very interested in their life. Now, when it comes to the life of your child, there are very few things that will influence their life as much as having a relationship with God. Those that can see their purpose in life tend to live happier lives. And for our kids, that purpose, it has to extend beyond themselves. Your child's life will be restless, unsatisfied, and unfulfilled unless they have some type of a faith or a relationship with God. In fact, there's a psychiatrist named Dr. Harold G. Koenig. He's a psychiatrist from Duke University, and he did a study titled Religion, Spirituality, and Health. And this massive study revealed that people of faith have more meaning and purpose in their life. So there's been a scientific study that proves those who have faith, when you bring your kids up in church to know God, scientifically speaking, they will have more meaning and purpose in their life. They will have higher self-esteem. They are less likely to commit suicide. They had reduced anxiety, and they're less likely to engage in risky sexual behavior, and they have better cognitive functioning skills. As a parent, I believe the very best thing we can do for our kids is to introduce our kids to know Jesus Christ. Do you agree with that statement, yes or no? This is the very best thing we can do. Yes, eat dinner around the table, engage as a family, but you've got to invest in your kids' spiritual journey. And the reason we've chosen Christianity is because we believe Christianity can help answer some of the most important questions that our kids are going to have. You see, everybody on this planet, when you're born and you come into this world, if you live long enough, every single one of us, including your kids, there are 3 questions, whether they realize it or not, that they need to have answered. In fact, these are the 3 most important questions. In fact, notice your lesson guide here on the very front page. A, it says, what are the 3 important questions that Christianity answers? And here they are. Number one, where did I come from? Where did I come from? So again, when it's highlighted or blue, that's, the word you want to fill in that blank. So our kids want to know, where did I come from? In fact, this is why many people choose religion, whether Christianity or another religion, is because they want to answer that question, where did I come from? Question number 2, what am I doing here? In other words, what is my purpose? What is life's purpose? This is a question that your kids need to have answered. Where did I come from? what is my purpose, and where am I going? Where am I going? And I believe that Christianity gives the very best explanation for these questions. And I believe Christianity will help comfort and encourage our kids when they struggle with things like anxiety and depression. And I want you to notice that I said when they struggle. I didn't say if they struggle. I said when they struggle. Because every single person at some point in their life is going to struggle with anxiety or depression. And I want you to know, I want to add this caveat here. If you struggle with anxiety or depression, I want you to know right now, you are not a second-class citizen. Did you hear me? If you struggle with anxiety or depression, you are not a second-class citizen. God loves you, and He's not forsaken you. And the reason I add that is I was doing a seminar once at a church, and a lady came up to me, and she said, I struggle with both anxiety and depression. I said, well, tell me more. She said, well, I talked to my mom, and my mom told me the reason I'm struggling with anxiety and depression is because I'm not praying hard enough, and it's because I don't trust God enough. And I said to her, with all due respect, your mom is wrong. The reason you're struggling with anxiety and depression isn't because you don't pray enough. It's not because you don't trust God enough. Without going into a lot of detail, there's a number of factors, both environmental factors as well as, chemical imbalances that could be in the brain that cause both anxiety and depression. And so with life being as hard as it is, there is going to come a time when your kids, if they live long enough, they're going to struggle with either anxiety, depression, or maybe both. And what our kids need more than anything is, number one, they need a parent to know. They need to know that they have a parent. Let me rephrase that. They need to know that they have a parent that is willing to fight for them. Our kids need to know that they have a mom and a dad that will love them no matter what, and even if. Would you agree with me that life is hard? Yes or no? Is life hard? Life is extremely hard, right? As grown-ups it's hard, but imagine for our kids how hard life can be, especially when they hit kind of that adult age and they're trying to figure things out, and it's hard. And at the end of the day, what your kids need to know is, number one, is God is for them, and number one, mom and dad are also for them, and that you've got their back. We need to make sure our kids understand that thing. In fact, let's open up our lesson guide here, and we're going to begin to look at some of the questions. So if you open your lesson, B at the top of the page, it says, what are two things that you can do to build a foundation of self-understanding and purpose in the life of your child? Now, it looks like I actually put three things up here, but you can fit them in the two. So being a part of a church is number one. It's important that our kids, as long as they're able and willing, because yes, they will hit a certain age when we can no longer force them. When they become adults, they have to choose for themselves. But bring them to church and incorporate prayer and family worship, especially prayer. In fact, studies show that when parents pray for their kids, not just for their kids, but pray with their kids, that plants an incredible seed in the hearts and minds of our children. Every now and then a parent will come up to me and they say, Tyler, I brought my child up in church and my kid no longer goes to church. My child is a prodigal. What do I do? And I say, number one thing you do is you love your child. You love your child in such a way. You may not love what they do, but you've got to love your child in such a way that your child knows they can always come home and mom and dad are going to love them unconditionally. Is that true, yes or no? Something else I tell the parent is this. If you've got a prodigal and they've left God or they left the church, They could be out of the church for 50 years, you know? But what that child doesn't know, but I'm going to tell you right now, what that child doesn't know is when they walk away from God and they walk away from church and they go out into the world, they don't know this, but they are actually dragging a spiritual anchor around them everywhere they go in life. Does that make sense? Everywhere they go in life, when they walk away from God and they walk away from the Adventist community of believers and they go out into the world, they are bringing with them a spiritual anchor, and that anchor is attached to the church, and they are going and dragging that with them everywhere they go. I've met people who've been out of the church for 30, 40, 50 years, living just a complete worldly life. But you know what? They always, even though they're not practicing, they always remember Friday night when the sun goes down. They may be out of the church, out in the world, but guess what? They always know when it's Sabbath. Did you know that? They may not be practicing and keeping the Sabbath, right? They're out in the world, but they're dragging that spiritual anchor. So you keep praying and you keep loving on them because you want them to come back. Now, I mentioned this earlier, but know that you don't have to be a perfect parent to be a good parent. There's no such thing as a perfect parent. Now, you can ask my kids, maybe don't ask them, but they'll tell you, I'm not a perfect parent. I have made mistakes, I have yelled, I have done things I've had to apologize for. But at the end of the day, I believe my kids honestly, sincerely know and believe that their mom and dad love them and will fight for them every step of the way. Notice C on your lesson guide. It says you don't have to be a perfect, you do not have to be a perfect, oh, that's mistyped. You do not have to be a perfect to be a good parent. That's a typo, I apologize. What are two crucial items that kids crave? So number one is up on the screen. Number one, kids want you to be present with them. Kids want you to be present with them. This is very, very important. We call this being in the moment. Kids want you to be present with them. And number two, kids need to know what their parents believe about them. So kids want you to be in the moment, and kids want to know what their parents believe about them. So let me go back real quick, and I want to touch a little bit about kids want you to be, present with them as being the moment. Here's an example, and I see this all the time. Parents will take kids to the park because the kids want to go to the park. And instead of engaging with their kids at the park, what do the parents often do? They sit on the bench and they pull out their cell phone, right? And they start looking at everything, Facebook, TikTok, whatever your social media preference. They spend time on, no, you go play. Mommy and Daddy are sitting over here, right? And now, have I been guilty of that? Yeah, I've been guilty of that. Have you been guilty of that by looking at your faces? Yeah, probably, But, you may not be batting 1,000, but more times than not, you want to be in the moment. You want to be present with your kids. And then I also said, number two was, kids need to know what their parents believe about them. Our kids need to know, when it comes to mom and dad, what do you believe about them? Now, parents, do not forget what I'm about to tell you. As parents, when you walk into a room, say your kids are in a room, when you walk into that room where your kids are, within 15 seconds, your kids are able to read your body language, and they can usually tell the kind of day that you've had. Now, here's what I mean about kids need to know what you believe about them. Here's a scenario that often plays out in homes. The child will be sitting at like the kitchen table or maybe the kitchen counter, and they're sitting at the counter doing something. And mom and dad will walk into the kitchen to get something out of the fridge, and we don't acknowledge our child. We just walk and get something out of the fridge and we leave. We don't acknowledge our child. Then we come back to the kitchen a few minutes later. Our child's still at the counter. We come back into the kitchen. They're sitting there. We don't acknowledge them, and we do something in the kitchen, and then we leave. when that scenario plays out over and over and over again, where you're walking into the room where your child is, over and over again throughout the day, the week, the month, the year, and you're not acknowledging your child by making a face or a smile or, hey, what are you working on? How are you doing? What that does is it ingrains in the minds of kids that maybe I'm not as important to mom and dad. And so we want to get into the habit of letting our kids know what we believe about them. And we do that when we acknowledge them when we walk into a room where our kids are. Now I want to jump ahead a little bit for time's sake. Now when it comes to parenting, this is D on your lesson guide. When it comes to parenting, remember that more is caught than taught. So those little eyes of your kids, they are constantly watching mom and dad. More is caught than taught. So don't just teach your kids how to be kind. Don't just tell your kids to be nice. Demonstrate in front of your kids what it means to be kind, what it means to be nice. Whatever the attributes are that you want your child to have, don't just say it, but actually live that out in front of them. And remind yourself always that more is taught than caught. Look at E on your lesson guide. It says, know who your child's friends are and get to know their parents. Now, when I was a kid, I grew up in Southern California. I was born in Los Angeles. I grew up by the beach. And when I grew up, where I lived, it was very common where in my generation, me and my friends, my sister, we would leave the house in the morning and we would be gone like all day long. And my parents had no idea where we were. We just had to come back. We had to come back home in the evening before the street lights came on for dinner. And so I would be in people's homes and my friends' homes, and they had older siblings and what have you. And my parents really didn't know who these people were that were in the homes that I was spending the entire afternoon. And some of them were teenagers, and bad things sometimes took place. But in our generation, I think we know much better. So when it comes to our kids, you've got to not only know who their friends are, but you got to know who their friends' parents are, right? That's very important, because it's our job as parents, it's our job to raise our kids. It's not our kids' friends' jobs to raise them. It's not Hollywood's job, right? It's not what they watch on social media. It's our job as parents to raise our kids. That's why the Bible tells us in Proverbs 29:15, a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. In fact, one of the most famous verses is probably Proverbs 22, verse 6. And the Bible says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it, right? Now, there are some parents who want to raise their child in what we call a spiritual bubble. And what I mean by that is they want to raise their kids in a home where there's no TV, no computer, right? No radio, no phones. I mean, just like isolated, back in kind of the country where they're not around anybody from society. And I mean, if that's your conviction, I certainly don't want to knock you for that. But here's the truth. The truth is as parents, we can't protect our kids from everything. And so what we want to do as parents when our kids are young is we want to set rules that our kids follow. So when the kids are young, you want your kids to follow a rule. And a rule is something where there's like an external consequence that enforces or compels them to obey. So when they're young, they follow a rule, all right? But as the kids get older, We don't want them just to follow rules. Rather, we want our kids to follow principles. You see, a rule is something that's external that compels them, whereas a principle is something that's inside of your child that compels them to make smart choices. Because eventually, as parents, our kids are going to leave the home and we're not going to be there to set rules, right? They're going to make decisions for themselves. So at some point in parenting, we want to transition from simply saying, you're going to follow this because I said, to we want you to follow this because this is the principle we as a family have chosen to follow. Because we want our kids to live a principled life, right? I mean, when they're younger, we tell them, hey, don't take that toy from little Johnny. It doesn't belong to you. But as they get older, the idea is we don't take things from other people that don't belong to us because that's not the kind of person, that's not the kind of people that we are. And so you're teaching them to live by principle, and that's your child making a choice to live a principled life. Remember, when it comes to parenting, more is caught than taught. And so as parents, it's important that we live out these principles in front of our kids. We can't tell our kids, don't do this while they're watching mom and dad do the very thing we told them not to do, right? Yeah, we've got to live a principled life in front of our kids. Now, I may be getting ahead of myself here, but here's an example of this. Actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll come back and I'll share that here in just a moment. But notice what Moses tells us. This here is in the book of Deuteronomy. Moses says, and these words which I command you today shall be in your what? Heart. So the rule, the 10 Commandments, those are the rules, and they're written on stone, right? Those are the rules. But the principles are the same as the rules. But now Moses says, I want you to have them in your what? In your heart, right? That's the new covenant. It's same law, same rules, but it's in our heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and you shall talk to them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise. These are the principles that Moses is talking about. Moses is saying, everywhere you go, teach your kids. Everywhere you go, look for teaching opportunities. The best way to show our kids to live a principled life is by living out those values in front of them and looking for opportunities to demonstrate this. So, for example, several years ago, we were shopping at an electronics store near our house. I don't think you have the same store. It's called Best Buy. It's a big electronics store. Are there Best Buys here in Singapore? What is it called here? Okay, so it's kind of the same, computers, TVs, everything electronic. So where I live, it's called Best Buy. And I was leaving the store at Best Buy, and my wife and kids were in the car. And as I was walking out to the car, I looked down, and sitting there on the ground was $100 bill. Ooh, praise the Lord Jesus, manna from heaven, right? So I went down, I picked up that $100 bill, and I put it in my pocket like this. And I went back and I sat in the car. I didn't say anything to my family, but they could just see it on my face. They said, well, what are you so happy about, right? What did you do? And I pulled it out. I said, look what I found on the ground, right? $100 bill. That's a lot of money. $100 bill? That's good money, right? So I had a choice to make. I could just keep it in my pocket and drive away like nothing happened, or I thought, this is a good opportunity. This is a good teaching lesson. So I said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back into Best Buy, and I'm going to let the manager know that I found money in the parking lot. And I'm going to give the manager my phone number. And if anybody reports that they lost money, They can give me a call, but of course they have to tell me how much they lost, right? I mean, if someone says, hey, I lost some money, I'm okay, well, what did you lose? How much? What were the what kind of bills were they? And so the point I was making here is I wanted to demonstrate honesty. Because in my mind, that $100 was pretty cool, but I thought, what if that belonged to like a single mom, right? What if that $100 belonged to like an elderly person and that was like, part of their like monthly stipend they got from the government or something, their retirement check. And I thought, this money for a lot of people could be a huge thing. And so I wanted to demonstrate for my kids that we have integrity and honesty, and if we can find out who this money belongs to, then we want to make sure we give that money back to them. Now, just in case you're wondering, nobody ever called, even the manager. And I went back to the store a week later just to see, has anybody reported losing money? And they said no. We waited another week, and then you can only wait so long, and pretty soon we were like, all right, well, it's, and Nathaniel, who did I spend that $100 on? I spent the $100 on his birthday present, and so, he was happy to have that $100 spent on him. And so that's what it means to live a principled life. Now let's keep going here. Where do we go? Where do we leave off on here? Are we on F? F. So let's talk a little bit about social media. Kids need affirmation. F is kids need affirmation. Now, it's important to know when we talk about affirmation that the longer you can wait, the longer you can keep your kids from social media, the better. Now, when it comes to social media or even cell phones, it's important to understand that these things actually work against our kids, especially social media. Now, I can have a rule-based life and tell my kids, nope, you're not going to have any cell phones. No cell phones. Cell phones are from the devil, right? Well, not really, because a cell phone's just technology, and you'd be hard-pressed to live a life today without having a cell phone. But when it comes to social media, let me tell you, the longer you can wait for your kids to get on social media, the better. Now, right now, neither one of my kids, my daughter has a phone, my son does not have a phone, he's always on my phone, but my kids do not have social media. And the reason is because every single study done shows that social media works against your kids. And I know you're going to have parents, and maybe you're a parent, I'm not going to beat you up here too much, but I'm going to be honest with you, you may have friends that let their 7-year-old have a TikTok account. You may have friends that let their 9-year-old have a Facebook or a Snapchat or an Instagram or I don't know what all the other ones are, but some type of social media account. Know this, that you are playing with fire. All right? You are playing with fire. Let me tell you, I am so convinced of this. I believe with all my heart that the day is going to come when people will view social media the same way people view tobacco today. You see, if you go back in time like 60 years ago, cigarette smoking was socially acceptable. You could smoke in hospitals. You could smoke on airplanes. Can you imagine smoking on an airplane? You can smoke in restaurants. People smoked on TV. Look at some of the old TV shows, the old black and white TV shows, and people are smoking on it. And that TV show was sponsored by Marlboro or Camel cigarettes or Winston cigarettes. It was socially acceptable. And I believe the day is going to come when as a society we will view social media the same way we now view tobacco. Because the social media companies do not care about you. They do not care about your children. And all those things on social media, whether it's the hearts or it's the views or it's the little pings, all those little things, they have carefully crafted all those things on social media because what those little things do is they give the brain of that 10-year-old, that 15-year-old, that 20-year-old, all those little pings on social media, it gives your brain a little shot of dopamine. Did you know that? So when you see my video's got 10 likes, boom, your brain gets a shot of dopamine. My video's been seen by 500 people. I have all these hearts, all these thumbs up, all these your brain is constantly getting these little shots of dopamine, 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 where that social media becomes like a drug, is what it does. And kids attach their value in life to how many views, how many likes they have. I tell you, instead of having social media be the number one affirmer in our kids' life, I believe it should be dads. Dads need to be the number one affirmer in their child's life. In fact, one of the best things for kids is to have an engaged father, or I should say, have a father engaged in their life. You know what society has tried to do through TV shows and cartoons and movies is society has worked against dads. Did you know that? I'm not sharing this to take away from moms. I'm not taking away from moms, but let me tell you, every child needs to have an engaged father. The reason I mention that is typically the mom's going to be engaged. But it's easy for Hollywood to show dads as being kind of aloof or a goof or like a sex-crazed kind of maniac. Often in TV shows, like the dog is smarter than the father and the dad is kind of the butt of all jokes. But the reality is our kids, they need an engaged father. They did a study on people incarcerated in the United States. They did a study on those that are in jail and in prison to find out what was the number one metric, or what was the number one kind of issue or point that stood out for all the individuals that were incarcerated in the United States. And the number one thing done in the study on those that are incarcerated is those that are incarcerated, like 80% of them grew up in a home where there was not an engaged father. Think about that. That was the number one factor of why men were in prison, is because they grew up in a home where there was not a father. Notice H on your lesson guide. Kids need parents who are willing to make what? Sacrifices. Now, when I talk about sacrifices, here's what I'm talking about. When I mention sacrifices, I'm talking about a parent who is willing to sit across the table and engage their teenager, and this teenager hasn't spoken to their parent in a couple of days because mom and dad took away their cell phone. You know, the temptation for many parents is to want to be their child's best friend. But here's the reality. Our kids are going to have many friends in life, but they're only going to have one mom and they're only going to have one dad, right? Friends come and go, but our kids are only going to have one parent. And kids need parents. This is I guess it'd be the third page. Kids need parents who will be spiritually strong for them. Kids need, let me go back real quick. Kids need parents who are going to be spiritually strong for them. Sorry, I'm working two computers here, and sometimes I forget which computer I'm on when it comes to my notes, so I think I've got it straightened out here. Kids need parents who are going to be spiritually strong for them. When it comes to religion, we have to be proactive in the life of our kids. The next one here is J. Kids need parents who will be in the moment with them. We talked about that, right? Put down the cell phone. Be in the moment with your child. This is something that I struggle with, you know, and this is something that I'm trying to learn in life, where if I'm at work and I'm in a meeting, I want my brain to be in that meeting. I want to be in the moment. If I'm on a date with my wife at a restaurant, I want my brain to be in the moment on that date with my wife. If I'm at the park with my son, or if I'm at like an amusement park with my child, or whatever I'm doing, I want to be and living in the moment and give my full attention to whatever is in the moment at that time. Kids need to know what their parents believe about them. This is K. Kids need to know what you believe about them. And when it comes to this, don't just focus on their accomplishments. I know it's easy to brag about, hey, my kid gets straight A's. That's important. My kid's the president of the class. That's important. My kid's the star of their sports team. That's important. Nothing wrong with that. But rather than just focus on accomplishments, focus on character, empathy, honesty, right? Kindness, being polite, knowing how to look people in the eye, knowing how to smile. Focus on those types of traits. Kids need parents to demonstrate what it means to live a principled life. Be the number one affirmer in your child's life, and don't just focus on performance, focus on character and demonstrate. More is caught than taught. Demonstrate what it means to live a principled life. And the next one is, kids need to learn to be responsible. Kids need to learn to be responsible. Now, in a book by Dr. Henry Cloud, it's a book called Boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud. It's a fabulous book. I recommend pretty much anything that Dr. Henry Cloud writes. But in this book, he lists the order of progression of kids learning boundaries. And so this is the order that our kids need to learn. So the number one thing our kids need to learn is how to receive a no when it comes from their parents. Let me mention this real quick. Kids not only need to learn how to receive a no, but they also need to learn how to give a no, right? This is important. Kids have to know how to receive a no, but also how to give a no. And I'll expand on this in just a moment. So the first thing is kids need to know how to hear no from their parents. The second no is they need to learn how to receive a no from their siblings. They need to, number three, is learn how to receive a no from their teacher. In other words, when their teacher says, no, put that down, stop doing it, they need to listen to their teachers. They need to learn how to receive a no from their school. They need to learn how to receive a no from a boss or a supervisor. Number six is they need to learn how to receive a no from their spouse. Now notice the progression here. Number seven, they need to learn how to have a no when it comes to health problems. This means saying no to themselves when it comes to overeating, alcoholism, or an irresponsible lifestyle. And here's the final no. The final no is number 8. And this is the police, the courts, and even prison. You see, when you find somebody who's incarcerated, when you find somebody who's going through the court system and they're going to go to prison or jail, I mean, eventually, if they don't learn how to receive a no from those first 7 steps, they get all the way down to step 8, and then guess what? A no is forced upon them, and they have no other options but receiving a no. Whereas the goal of parenting is to help our kids learn to accept a no early in life, hopefully in stage number 1. Does that make sense, yes or no? I mean, if they can't respond to mom and dad, when mom and dad say, no, we're not going to do that, if they can't listen to mom and dad, you can't expect them to listen to the teacher. And if they can't listen to the teacher, you can't expect them to listen to their boss. But they also need to know how to give a no. When my daughter Belle was on a date someday with a future boy, hopefully that's many years away still, but when my daughter's out on a date with a boy, and obviously I'm not going to be there, but when she's on a date with a boy, and if that boy decides to try to put a move on her, I want my daughter to have the courage inside to be able to look at that boy and say, no, I'm not doing that, right? But if they never learn how to receive or say no, what happens is they'll end up saying yes and making a mistake that they will end up regretting at a future date in their life. The Bible says in Proverbs 19:27, the Bible says, cease listening to instruction, my son, and you will stray from the words of knowledge. The next one here is N on your lesson guide. Kids need to learn the importance of boundaries. Kids need to learn the importance of boundaries. Now, this is something that we call, in fact, this is going to be O. So if you filled in boundaries, here's the last one here. One of the best skills that parents can teach their kids is the skill we call delay of gratification. This is one of the best skills that you can teach your kids, how to delay gratification, right? How to delay gratification. And here's an example of that. Your child comes home from school and they have homework to do. That's a normal thing. As a parent, I'll tell you right now, I'm not a big fan of homework at all. But the kid comes home with homework. But your child wants to play video games instead of homework, right? Now, you can set a rule, and the rule is you're not going to play video games until you're all caught up with your homework. But eventually, again, the goal of parenting is you want your kids to learn to live a principled life. You want them to learn how to delay gratification. So you tell your child you have a choice. You can do your homework now, get it all done, and then you can play video games, or you can choose to play video games now and do your homework later. But what that means is if you come home tomorrow, or if you come home from school this weekend and you're not caught up with all of your schoolwork, then you're making the choice to be grounded from your video games because you didn't get caught up on your schoolwork. So I'm giving you, as the parent, I'm giving you the option to choose. You can either choose to do your homework now, or you can choose to play video games now, knowing in the future there's going to be a consequence. And so let's say your child chooses, you know what? I'm not going to delay gratification. No way, man. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do my video games now, all right? So they don't learn the principle of delayed gratification, and they play video games now, which means they don't do their schoolwork, which means they get behind in school the next day, and they come home the next day, and they've got even more schoolwork, and then they're grounded from video games, and they get angry and say, "How dare you take away my video games?" You say, "No, I didn't take away your video games. You took away your video games. You chose to play video games over doing your schoolwork. I didn't ground you. You made a choice and you chose video games over schoolwork, and there's consequences when we make those kinds of decisions in life." Can you see the difference, yes or no? And so you're telling your child, "No, I didn't ground you. You chose to be grounded. No, I didn't take away your phone. You chose to give me your phone because of the choices that you made." There are consequences to choices that we make. And I tell you, as parents, the sooner, and it's hard. It is hard, but the earlier, the sooner we can help our kids understand how to delay gratification to get a job done, they will be more successful when it comes to adulthood. I love that this is the Message Bible, and it says in Proverbs 15:10, "It's a school of hard knocks for those who leave God's path, a dead-end street for those who hate God's rules." Let me ask you guys here, how many of you have ever been to the school of hard knocks? Anybody here? None of you have ever been to the school of hard knocks? Do you understand that school of hard knocks? It's like life is your greatest teacher. When you make a bad choice, you have consequences that you have to suffer. And consequences, even though they're not very exciting, they can actually be your greatest teacher. That's what it means when you go to the school of hard knocks, is life itself, when we make a bad choice, the consequences become our greatest teacher. So have you ever been to the school of hard knocks? Have you ever made a choice in life that you wish you could go back and maybe make differently? And so when it comes to parents, let me tell you, when it comes to parenting, being a parent is going to be one of the most challenging jobs that you have in life. But God has put inside of you everything you need to be a good parent. You're never going to be a perfect parent. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to lose it. There are times that you are going to raise your voice and yell at your kids. There are times as a parent you will get upset with your kids, and you're upset with your kids not so much because of what they did, but because in that moment you were thinking about some unfortunate event or stressful thoughts, and you simply took it out on your kids because they were, well, right there in front of you. That will happen. But know, as parents, it's okay to apologize. It's okay to tell your kids, hey, I'm sorry I blew it. The other day I yelled at you, I snapped at you, I jumped all over you. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. But God's given you everything you need to be a good parent. So remember, live in the moment. Make God a priority in your home. Schedule time to sit around the dining room table and eat dinner. Life is busy, and some of you, both of you have jobs, but all of us only have 24 hours in a day. There's nobody out there who has 25 hours or 20. We all have 24 hours in a day. And so we've got to prioritize what is most important to you. And this goes back to your value list. Think about your value list. What's most important to you? Are your kids more important than your job? Are your kids' spiritual welfare more important than to you than money? I hope not. I mean, we need to have jobs. We need to make a living. But your kids are only going to have one set of parents. And that set of parents is you. So even if you grew up in a home where you didn't have the best experience, remember, you can change your family tree. You can change any cycle of dysfunction. It's never too late to make a difference in your child's life. Now, there's a couple of questions I want you to take a look at, and you can go home and you can look at these with your spouse or even with your kids. Have your kids look at these questions. Here's the questions. Number one, based on what was just covered, what are some practical things parents can do to build a stronger relationship with their kids? Think about that. What are some things that we can do to build a stronger relationship? Number two, what comes to mind when you hear the phrase, more is caught than taught? Remember, those eyes, those kids' eyes are always watching you, right? More is caught than taught. Number three, describe some qualities of good parents. Here's what I like to do. When I'm in a situation, I like to think, in this situation, what would a good parent do? And then that's what I do. In this situation, what would a godly dad do? Well, that's what I'm going to do, right? So that's number three. Number four, why is it important for parents and their children to be a part of a church community? Bringing your kids to church. In fact, our church, the Adventist Church, has done studies. When you bring your kids to church, when you enroll your kids in Pathfinders, when you enroll your kids in the local Adventist school, when you have family prayer, when you're involved in doing outreach together as a family, these are some of the best tools that you can do in raising your kids to know and love Jesus. And then, of course, you've got a homework assignment. You can read the homework assignment on your own. You can implement that homework assignment. Now, the final thing I was going to mention is, where can you watch all 10 presentations? Well, if you want to see the entire live seminar, there's a QR code up on the screen. Go ahead and scan that QR code, and you can go. And if you missed the presentation last night on marriage, it's on there. I think it's number 7. But there are 10 presentations. Underneath each video, you'll see the PowerPoint presentations. You'll also see the lesson guide, the PDF. And it's all free. It's there for you if you want to take a look at it. There's 10 presentations. Now, I recorded these in a studio. At the very beginning of COVID, we recorded this because everything was online. And so we were doing this as an online outreach tool in our communities there in the greater Seattle area. So did it work? Did the QR code work for everybody? Did you get it? Now, something else this will do is I've been told if you can't go to sleep at night and you're having a hard time sleeping, just put on one of Pastor Tyler's sermons. Let me tell you, you will be asleep in no time, right? I'll put you to sleep, man. Hey, I've really enjoyed getting a chance to spend a little bit of time with you guys this afternoon. I hope it was beneficial. I know it's hard. We just had that big lunch, but the fact you stuck around really means a lot. Now, I will be back here on Monday night at 8 p.m. We're going to make a transition, and we're going to begin to take a look at the Bible and prophecy and really sharing Jesus. And so, you know what? It's not too late to go and invite somebody to come to the seminar on Monday night. I'm going to invite Pastor Johnny to please come on up. And if there's any closing thoughts or instructions, you're more than welcome to share them with us.
Quickly get maybe you can close a word of prayer, and then we'd like to get a big picture together as all the families that are here. So
nice, yeah.
So maybe you want to pray first?
Yes, let's pray. Father in heaven, I just want to thank you and praise you, Lord. This idea of a family is not an idea that we had. It's one that you came up with. Because love is never isolated. To really experience love, we have to be connected with other people. And so you came up with this idea of having a family. Not just a church family, but our individual families, mom and dads and kids. And Lord, I'm convinced that parenting is the hardest job. Well, maybe being a single parent has got to be the hardest job on this planet. And so for the parents here today, I pray, Lord, that you would bless them as parents. If there's any single parents here today, maybe a single mom, a single dad, Lord, I pray that you would come alongside them and you would just encourage them and love upon them and be with our kids. Our kids, Lord, it's hard being young. It's hard growing up in this society with all the different forms of media and technology, everything vying for our attention. Father, I pray for our kids, that our kids would grow up and want to know Jesus and want to serve him. So bless us now, Lord. Bless Pastor Johnny, the leaders, the Maranatha Church, Lord. Bless this church, we ask, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Why don't we take a picture together? I think it's always good that